so much of what we need for the present and future of technology is a human-centric lens. And who has it better than the folks who are in this discussion right now? HR should absolutely be in the room when the question is like, what should we build, and not just, how do we roll this thing out?
You're listening to HR Superstars, a podcast brought to you by 15Five. On this show, we talk to strategic people leaders who are making a meaningful impact in their organizations and shaping the future of work. So get ready to be inspired and discover the secrets behind building high-performing teams and fostering a culture of growth and thriving. The future of HR starts here. I'm Karina Young, our VP of People here at 15Five. For a long time, HR has been in catch-up mode. We're adopting new tools, we are managing constant change, and helping our organization survive one transformation after another. But at the end of the day, the question that always we end up coming back to is, what happens if we were to stop reacting and start leading these changes from the front? Because innovation is about more than just the next piece of technology. It's about how work actually works, how people experience change, how decisions are getting made, and if our values and ambitions are keeping pace with each other or if they're feeling at odds. And as HR, we don't have to just sit back and support that work. We can shape it. And that's what today's conversation is all about, and why I'm so excited to have Kate O'Neill here joining with us so that we can talk about how HR can really build the future of work, not by chasing trends, but by making intentional human-centered choices about what comes next. Kate is known all across the world as a tech humanist. She's a digital innovator, business leader, founder and CEO of KO Insights, where she's helping organizations use data and AI to create better human experiences at scale. In her latest book, What Matters Next, she gives a practical guide for leaders navigating rapid technology change without losing sight of what matters. We're going to talk about guiding tech decisions with a human lens today, how to balance efficiency with empathy, and how to bring people's strategy into the boardroom when innovation is on the agenda. Kate, welcome. Love having you here. I'd love to ask our guests, give us like the movie trailer intro to who you are and what led you to what you're doing today.
I love movie trailer intro. That's such a great way to frame it. It's always fun to try to decide where to go back to begin the story. But for me, it's like there's a couple of interesting threads that weave together at some point, which is that all through my life, I've been interested in both storytelling, kind of communication, and technology and programming and computers. So since childhood, literally, those things wove together. And I ended up, through many twists and permutations, leaving my focus around language and going to work in Silicon Valley in the early heady days of the mid-90s, when we were building a lot of the brands that we know and love or hate or whatever today. I ended up being one of the first 100 employees at Netflix, the first content manager in that role. And that was really fascinating. It was a cool time to be there. But I've also had a lot of other really formative and kind of early day experiences. And throughout that whole thing, I think the running theme is I'm just fascinated with people and with what makes people tick as much as I am with technology. And technology for me is interesting mainly for how it facilitates what people can do and what we're capable of individually and together, and how we can use it to kind of communicate with one another. So relevant for what I think a lot of HR innovation relates to.
I was just, funny talking to a friend the other day, remember when Netflix was literal DVDs? And
Yes.
Now that feels like an ancient, that's like dating myself a long time ago. But it's just, that's so cool to hear that journey and to think about the cross section of people and innovations. I think in the HR space too, there's a lot of leaders who are thinking about that, but not totally sure how to bring it together, how to kind of put their hat in the ring as someone who can lead. And so maybe to start us off, I'm curious to hear more about you. I know a topic that you're really passionate about is kind of the differences between digital transformation and innovation, right? And a lot of people use those words interchangeably, that we're innovators, we're transforming things. Tell me a little bit about your perspective there and where you see some difference that most people miss.
Yeah, thank you. That is one of the insights that I landed on in the writing of What Matters Next. I found that to be an interesting revelation to me, that we do talk so much about transformation and innovation. And throughout my career, throughout the 30 years in tech that I've been in this space, we've used these terms and used them almost as if they are synonyms for one another. And what I learned is I introduced this model in What Matters Next called the now next continuum. It's basically a timeline, but it's really saying, look, there's a continuity from the past to the present, looking into the future. And the function of this timeline is to make the future less scary, make it feel less mysterious, less like this completely uncertain place that we just have no idea what could possibly happen in it, because there is a continuity. We have already made some decisions that will play out in certain ways in the future. And the relevance of the transformation and innovation discussion to this is that I realized that they actually sit on different ends of that spectrum. So transformation is actually a matter of bringing the past into the present. It's a matter of saying, look, there are things, we have sort of technical debt. We've made decisions in the past. We're invested in different kinds of technologies and resources. And what we need to do is bring them forward. We need to bring them into the moment where our competitors are changing the way they do things. The market has different expectations of how things are going to go. Like externalities have just happened, like COVID, and we just need to adapt to what's in the reality all around us. So that's bringing the past to the present. And innovation, of course, is about looking from the present into the future and creating, kind of white space around the operation and saying, what could we do that's different, that no one is thinking of yet, that, that's the streaming to the DVDs, right? That we can go and create a whole new offering that builds upon what our competencies are or sort of puts us out into a whole new territory. The beauty and magic of that is that what you innovate and succeed with is going to create the requirement of transformation for everybody else in your industry thereafter. So it's this kind of ongoing cycle that every organization is constantly having to do, which is this transformation to innovation, transformation to innovation. And we're always doing this process. So I think it really helps us to have that understood as a healthy process and one that shouldn't feel like failure if we find ourselves again and again back at the sort of the beginning of a transformation project, because we're always going to be in transformation and we should ideally be doing innovation as well alongside it.
I imagine that's really helpful for thinking about navigating our employees through change, because what you were talking about really resonated with me, of that fear of the unknown, of people running, well, what is the future? What's happening? How does this impact me? How big is this? Why does all of this matter? Sometimes we get caught up in like all of the what ifs instead of, to your point, really grounding ourselves in like, if it's a transformation, like we're actually just pulling up things that we've already done before to meet who we are today, which we all probably do in our lives all the time without even really realizing it. I'm curious for you where you think that distinction can be particularly valuable for HR leaders in thinking about this space.
Yeah, I think that the transformation to innovation pipeline of sorts, and also understanding that along that now next continuum, gives us this confidence to understand something else that I point out a lot to my clients and to audiences, is that the future feels uncertain, but it isn't so much uncertain as it is undecided. And it's I think, a really powerful point of agency for us to recognize that there are plenty of things that happen that are sort of black swan events like COVID. I've now mentioned that twice, but that's true. There are things that we just don't control that just happen out of nowhere. But I think if we are intellectually honest and really circumspect about it, we can recognize that there are plenty more things that are happening because the wheels have been set in motion. And we should be able to recognize either our part in having put those things in motion because we made certain decisions in the past or today, or that we were able to observe that certain things were the kind of trends or priorities or whatever, where the allocation of resources have been. And so we can see where that's likely to go. And I think that what that does for us is, as it relates to HR, we can see, this kind of historical trend that's moved toward, sort of personalization and individualization of gauging talent and making sure that we can understand skills and we can understand, assessment and making sure that roles fit appropriately. And this is the direction that things are going. And so we can't be surprised by that. We have to be able to understand how we can meaningfully shape that kind of direction as it relates to the value proposition we want to offer in our organizations.
Well, and what's interesting when you say that too about being able to be a part of a decision that's made, right? Or it's not the uncertainty, it's that there's a decision that really needs to be made. We've got a solid group of people who are here who feel like they support the innovation, but aren't the decision makers. How do you think HR can maybe play a better role in moving from just being a supporting sideline influencer to actually really shaping some of those decisions?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question too, because one of the things I notice in my work all over the organizations I speak with, my audience from my own podcast, The Tech Humanist Show, is there's so many folks who tune in and come out to the audiences and read my books because they are not the decision maker in their organization and because they want to influence the decision making in their organization. I think that's incredible. In many of the roles I've been in throughout my career, I was not the primary decision maker. I think what happens is that the more informed you are and the more you're seeking to improve your own perspective, the more you tend to have influence within your organization. One of the things I tracked early in my career, I started realizing is that there's a very big difference between influence and authority. Like you may have overt authority or you may not, but you can always have influence no matter where you are inside the organization. And that influence can take the shape of being able to help subtly steer the responsibility and the ethics of decision making as it relates to tech decisions. It can have something to do with making sure that we're making more human-centered and more employee-centered kinds of decisions, making sure we're, doing things that are in alignment with what we think high integrity looks like and what's accountable to the people that we serve and the people we would very much like to have a good experience of their work inside the organization or their engagement with the organization. So those kinds of things, I think the stated leaders, overt top level leaders, are often looking to people within the organization who have their finger on the pulse for clues about which way they should go with these kinds of things. And so it's incredibly powerful to be that person who's, maybe 2, 3, 4, however many levels down inside the hierarchy you may perceive that you are, and yet you can still have incredible influence on the decisions that get made.
Well, I think you're one of the few people that's ever described that position that HR often finds itself in, being more of an influencer, as powerful. And I think that's such a beautiful perspective and valuable perspective to bring to it, because oftentimes I'll meet people early in their career who are like, well, I can't wait to be a C-level this, or I could be a leader of a company. I could make all those decisions. And man, be careful what you wish for, because the burden of having to make some of those incredibly hard top level decisions, it is tough. And really great leaders, to your point, Kate, look for clues. They look to people they trust to say, help steer me in that right direction. And so to actually be a trusted person to a leader in the company that I always know I can go to Kate. She's going to give me the truth. She's going to point me in the right direction. She'll also understand my perspective. She's someone I can brainstorm with. That's an incredibly valuable role to hold that I think even, for all of us in HR, we often just downplay that as maybe not good enough. Maybe I need to be the decision maker. That's how I have power. And power can come in so many different and meaningful forms. And so I just really love the reframe you put around that.
Yeah, I think it's also important to recognize we don't have to have all the answers either. Even from the perspective we sit in the organization, just having an informed perspective and an ethical and responsible and sort of 360-degree perspective of the work that you're doing in the organization is still really valuable. And a CEO or, VP level person who comes and talks to you about, kind of asking you your take on things, you don't necessarily need to have all the information about how all of it fits together across the organization. But if you have that sense of what's right and what's appropriate relative to what your initiatives are and how you are meant to be hitting your goals and what you see as far as the immediate impacts of things around you, that's still going to be incredibly helpful, incredibly useful to that next level up leader who's trying to just take in partial answers to synthesize the kind of insight that they need to make the right kinds of decisions going forward.
Absolutely. So what would you say are some of the most common mistakes that you've seen in organizations when people are trying to roll out new tools, new tactics, a big change plan? How would you help the leaders who are here today maybe be part of an influence to avoid some of those mistakes as well?
Yeah, so one of the things I identified in What Matters Next is this tendency. Well, so first of all, there's a two-part divide in the decision making we see. One is sort of rushing past what we don't understand and committing to some future that we're not quite ready for. So that's sacrificing the present for the future. And that is what we see with short-sightedness, short-sighted decision making. The other is sacrificing the future for the present. And that is to say, we believe we have something we need to do that's more future oriented, but we're hesitant and we're not committing to the change. We're not committing to the rollout. The example I use repeatedly throughout the book and throughout my speaking is climate change. I think many of us can recognize that there's just about nothing that we could do right now as a society that would feel rash in 10 years, right? Like if we look back with the benefit of hindsight 10 years from now, there's not very much that's likely we would go like, gee, we shouldn't have done that because it was too much, right? Like it was too much. But I think where we are is we have to put ourselves into the future and look back with wisdom, the hindsight wisdom, to be able to say, we need to push on this. We need to be acting with more urgency. And other things like the race toward emerging AI models in Silicon Valley are very much moving faster than we're really ready for. We don't have the wisdom to sort of normalize the fallout from what's going on in that race. So many organizations find themselves in much less drastic extremes of those examples. But that's the dilemma along the now next continuum that decision making within any organization falls into. Or do we have enough understanding to move ourselves from the past to the present to the future, or are we rushing? And where I see this play out is that some organizations, like classic example is Blockbuster, may recognize that they have the opportunity to transform and maybe trying to pull themselves out of, sort of old debts, technical debts or cultural debts, but they don't fully commit and they don't really embrace innovation as a path to get themselves into a new space and create new market opportunities. Even when they see that a market being created by competitors, they aren't making sure that they're moving themselves along that continuum. You see Kodak, same thing, right? Where they created the first digital cameras and yet they were the ones who lost out in the marketplace because they were unwilling to fully commit and let go or transform their market offering. And those are really kind of classic examples. There are much more contemporary ones. I think we can all kind of look around us and say, there are examples here where we probably could be moving with more rapidity, more certainty because there's urgency in this decision making. Or we probably don't have everything we need to understand yet about this. So maybe we should, not so much pump the brakes, but be very careful how we steer into this curve, right? Brakes aren't only about stopping or slowing us down. They're also about traction. And so we need to be very careful about how we steer into dangerous curves ahead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can think of examples from my career, even as you're telling these stories of times when it was like a company just didn't fully commit. There was a change we know we needed to make. We had to get people on board, but the organization, for one reason or another, wasn't willing to make everyone accountable for being a part of this journey, right? And then when you do that, it's like, well, okay, we're saying we're moving toward this thing or we're transforming in this way, but we're actually not really. And then you lose steam and then time goes on and now people are like, well, what are we even doing? Versus there are times when I've worked for many different leaders, especially in the tech space. I'm sure you have too, Kate, where it's like decisions get made. You wake up to an email at 6 a.m. from a leader and you're like, oh, that's a decision you're going for without getting other perspective or having conversation or learning from what happened in the past, right? And and I think it is, again, just an interesting position to be in HR in particular, to really think about being a coach and a guide in those moments. To, I think, even coming back to the words you were using, where can we talk to our leaders about, hey, do we have wisdom on this we can look back on to help us make the right decision and just be all in, go forward? Or are we making some assumptions here? Are we actually moving too quickly and need to slow down? Being able to know where we hit the gas and, to your point, hit the brake, get a little more traction.
HR has changed from support function to strategic powerhouse, but traditional HR software hasn't caught up. 15Five's performance management platform helps your HR team discover where to take action and make a business impact. Find out how to maximize employee performance, engagement, and retention at 15five.com or click the link in the show notes.
Something that I talk about a lot in What Matters Next is this decision-making process. We think that we learn by asking questions and getting answers, but the reality is a little more messy and complicated than that. And it's actually more useful than that, because what actually happens is when we ask really good questions, we gather partial answers. If you can relate to the idea that you've ever asked a question of, let's say, a team of 6 people or more, and gotten 6 different answers or more, right? Like, how many of you can relate to that idea? It's not a
Obviously,
simple,
nobody.
right? Like, it's a very, very universal phenomenon that you ask a
Yes.
question, you're not going to get an answer. You're going to get lots of answers. And that's not a bug, it's a feature. What we need to be doing is recognizing that what those answers represent is what I call partial answers. And the job of leadership, or of any wise person who wants to insert themselves in the decision-making process, is to synthesize those partial answers into a more whole truth. And that whole truth, it entails understanding what is insightful and what's meaningful to the organization. That's an insight, and insights are timeless. And what's the good thing about timeless answers and timeless insights, rather, is that when you then take them and sort of cut through the context of the now, what's going on in the context of trends and externalities, then you can actually arrive at a timely approach, something that you can decide to do today, while it also gives off what I call a bankable foresight, something that gives you a clue about what's likely to matter in the future. You can sort of put that aside and just say, look, I don't have to do this today, but this is telling me what my trajectory needs to be. There needs to be alignment between the answer that I decide on today, this approach that's today's answer, and the future direction of the organization or the company or my team or whatever, or myself personally. Like, this applies on a personal level too. So what's really powerful, I think, is that giving away the power in order to have the influence is really about having the integrity of being someone who can recognize that contributing partial answers from around the organization, which is what humans who are employees, who are parts of an organization do, HR really helps to synthesize that when its role is really arrived at. When HR really fulfills at its highest and best level, it is really acting as a powerful source of insights for the organization. And that is something that I think a lot of organizations can really lean into.
Yeah, 100%. You understand what's happening in the organization, your position in there. You have the right data. You yourself are going out and grabbing these signals and synthesizing those insights. So when the time comes and a leader asks you, hey, give me your perspective if we were to do this. Here's a proposal we're working on. Tell me how you think this part of the population will or won't react. You also have it there and can engage, right, in that conversation. That's such a powerful place to be. We can't be in this session about the future of work and not talk about AI and technology. So I'm going to take us down that path. One of the things you talk about, Kate, is ethical acceleration. Tell me a little bit more about what that means and kind of what happens when you see companies going too fast or waiting too long. A little bit of expanding on what we had just talked about.
It plays into both of the discussion we've already had about the 2 future-ready flaws of either moving too fast or too slow, relative to the continuum. And also it relates to that decisions to partial answers to insight synthesis to timely approaches and foresights process. Because what actually happens is that if we do the work on a regular basis of asking better questions and gathering more of those partial answers from a more diverse and more inclusive set of stakeholders, and really truly understanding what's real and what's true about our mission and our organization and what we uniquely bring to it, then we're in a much better place to use those insights to cut through clutter and cut through acceleration. So we can go fast. We can make decisions as they appear. If there's an imperative to roll out a particular AI product, and we can look at it and say, this seems like it's butting up against what we've always said to be true about our organization, which is this, right? It's this insight about who we are as a company. And not that we wouldn't use AI, but the particular implementation perhaps of AI. Like, this is going to collect private data from people that they don't know they're contributing. And we've always said we value privacy or transparency. So that's at odds. We've always said that our hiring process is going to have a very personal touch, very human to human. And so maybe this process of using chatbots to field certain kinds of inquiries from job applicants is only going to make sense if we implement that. We need to know that it's going to be human in the loop. We're going to have some kind of process where some of those applicants, some of the people that we're looking at are going to be surfaced to humans to actually interact with and review. So that's the point of this, is really to be able to move quickly as the market demands, but do it in a way that has integrity as we define it for our organizations. Whatever our values are, that we understand them and can articulate them and can see how they will align with what that future looks like.
I love hearing that, because one of the biggest blocker that folks named here for themselves right now is lack of time and capacity to evaluate those options. And so being able to utilize the tools that you've been talking about for ethical acceleration, I mean, there's no C-suite leader any of us are going to talk to who doesn't want to move faster and make better decisions and be more efficient as an organization. So to be able to bring this framing in there of like, we have to be able to move quickly in a way that is in service to the business, our values, our goals. Like, we can't make decisions that we then feel like in a couple months we've got to backtrack because we should have just made them better with the right information, the right conversation. And so all these tools, to your point, really come together to culminate to actually, how do we move faster in a way that is ethical, that is aligned to what matters to the business?
100%. And I think one of the things that's often a little vague for people when we talk this through is insights feel a little fuzzy. And we may understand, kind of on a personal level when we encounter an insight, but we may not necessarily know how that looks in a practical sense for this kind of ethical acceleration. So one of the examples I love to give is the concept of like Apple as a company is a very design-centric company. Everybody knows this about that company. They prioritize design as an ethos. They prioritize design as part of the experience for customers. And so think about if you're in that organization within an HR role, and part of what you're looking to do is roll out some kind of AI initiative that's going to be about, recruitment or about, candidate review, and it doesn't have a very well-designed kind of experience, that's a no, my friend. Like, it's not ready. It doesn't align with what the company is about. And so what has to happen is that there has to be integrity to that. It can still go fast, but I think what happens is we can look at something like that and go, it's well designed. That means it's a yes from us, right? We're moving. And I think that's the thing that we're all looking for, this kind of clarity in our organization, something that feels just as true in your organization as that Apple is a design-centric company.
That resonates so much with me. I think even just thinking about that, like, we often think about the design of our ultimate product or the program that we're launching in HR, but not actually the design of the decision of actually getting there, right? That can often fall kind of second or third place in line. And you get people together and now it's like, oh, what am I doing here? How am I moving us to a decision? What's the information I'm sharing? Designing a really well-structured decision-making process, that's actually how you get that buy-in later on, and how you also design for your employees of, this is why we landed on this decision. This is why it matters to all of us. And so making sure we're investing our time in some of those like unsexy places, right? Like, not the launch of your program, but how did you actually get to this decision and why is it right?
Yeah, so right. Being able to trace back and explain the integrity of those decisions to yourself is really important for our own self-worth. But I think also as we bring people into our organizations, we need to be able to know that we're not just going to be saying, like, this is just how it's always been done, right? Like, everybody hates when they get that answer. There needs to feel like there's more of a coherence for people who join the organization. And there needs to feel like there's a sense of something that has more of a DNA, like a cultural DNA to the organization. And that's where these insights really come into play.
Oh, yeah. I mean, especially now, I think in all parts of the world, again, even when we think about how we interact with the world, what we look for, what we buy, like going out to find something that hasn't changed or transformed in some way in the last couple of years. It's like, well, why would we buy? Like, why would we even go search for that? I'm curious, what's the advice you give to leaders that you work with to really think about carrying that culture and that history of their company forward into an AI age in a way that kind of meets transformation, innovation, right? On that now next continuum. Like, how do you really carry that forward without losing who you are?
So I think one of the things that it strikes me as kind of funny is some of the terminology around the future is one term that people use a lot is future proof. Like, we want to be future proof as an organization. And that is just silly to me. Like you can't be future proof. Like you think about what proof sounds like. If you think
Yes.
about if you have, I don't have kids personally, but if I had friends coming over who had kids, the first thing I would want to do is kid proof my apartment, right? And so like think about all the sharp edges that a kid could run into, all the knives that just might be lying around. I don't leave knives laying around, but that's what
Where's this a judgment-free
proofing,
space,
right?
Kate? Leave those knives out.
Right. That's what proofing sounds like to me, is you're somehow
Yeah.
trying to insulate against the things that could happen. It seems like a very defensive posture, and it seems like one that is more about worry than it is about opportunity. And instead, if we think about the future in a future readiness posture, if we think about it like, how do we get ourselves ready and resilient for the future, whatever it brings? Then it's less about
Yeah.
we're worried about sharp edges and more about we're trying to think about the various possibilities that might happen and how we can get ourselves into a place where we can be nimble and adapt as these things are taking shape. So we might want to do small experiments. We might want to say, like, there's a proof of concept of this particular AI tool, and we just want to see how it goes. And we're going to take a small portion of the workflow and allocate it to that tool and see, what kind of metrics we get out of it. And if it looks like it's good, if it's aligned with what our values are, if everybody's feeling good about it, then we'll roll it out to a wider group of people. But that's
Yeah.
future readiness. That's not future proofing. It's about
Yeah.
saying, look, we want to be our best selves going into the future, not a self that's going to be constantly looking over our shoulder and worrying that we're not keeping up.
Well, it makes me think of the example you gave earlier of Blockbuster, right? What would the difference have been for them if they were future ready versus potentially future proofing their business, right? Being able to come up against those walls of technological or cultural debt. What puts you in a position where you can be agile and say, like, I see the world changing and now I can adapt to it versus looking at everything you have and going, oh my gosh, is change even possible for us?
Yeah.
Are we even ready for it? That's such a different mindset to bring forward.
It's really a different mindset. And it's one that I think it's hard to get ourselves out of a protective place, and one where we, the things that we're used to, we just want to stay used to those things. And that's
Yeah.
been the downfall of many of the classic organizations that fall in these kind of classic case studies of like Blockbuster or Kodak, or for example, Research in Motion, which is BlackBerry, right? Many people may be familiar with the old BlackBerry devices, which were the predecessor to iPhones and that whole generation of smartphones. But they just could not get themselves out of the mindset that people wanted the keyboards. People wanted the keyboards. And people who used them, of course, did want the keyboards, but they should have been able to see the writing on the wall because there were plenty of trend reports and plenty of user feedback that suggested people were very, very open to this slate glass kind of surface. It's when you're getting data and you're choosing to ignore it or read it through the lens of, what your preferences are, instead of being intellectually honest and allowing yourself to really internalize, what is this telling me about what the future trends are likely to be and how I can best sort of start to move our organization toward that future state instead of clinging so much to the past.
Which, I mean, just comes back to your point around being able to gather that diverse set of opinions and perspectives and experiences. And for HR to be that person who can help synthesize it and say, this is actually what we need to see and understand. I'm not stating that HR could have saved BlackBerry, but I mean, who knows?
Maybe they could have.
Maybe they could have. Maybe they could have. But it is just like being able to have someone in the room who can, for leaders who are struggling, because it happens to some of the best leaders I've ever worked with, come up against a decision that for one reason or another hits something in them that just makes it hard to see the whole landscape of feedback. And to be a trusted partner to someone to say, why doesn't this feel important to you? You have the data, you have the information, but I keep seeing you say, not urgent, not now, not a part of what we need. Even just to be able to have that discussion with someone. Maybe you could or couldn't save the BlackBerry phone, but like, the opportunity is there, right? Like, and that's something that we as an HR function can really lean in and grab and take from all that you've shared.
I think that's right. And I think it also relates very much to what I see in the Q&A from Caitlin here about navigating leaders who don't want the feedback. It's very, very much in line with what you're summarizing there. I think the value that the company that I run now, KO Insights, as well as the company I ran and exited just before KO Insights. It's called MetaMarketer. We had a stated value at MetaMarketer that I carried forward into KO Insights, which was speak truth to power and confront with compassion. So it's not enough to say speak truth to power. I think that's a really laudable goal, and one that, especially in moments where we feel that what power is not paying attention to what people need, it's very important to speak truth to power. I think it's also important, though, in an everyday context of speaking truth to power, to recognize that power is just human in most cases. Like, the powers that be in an organization are leaders who are humans just like you and me, and who are struggling to make sense of the complex world that they're operating within. And so as you sort of feel the frustration of saying, like, we're not being seen, our needs are not being met, we have all of these different initiatives that we want to reconcile, or we want to see more priority given to this or that, we have to remember what kind of context that's going to be in when it's received by a leader, and be able to present it in a way that has more empathy for the complexity of that situation. They're like, look, I know that you're managing and wrestling with a lot of different priorities, and so maybe this doesn't feel like a high one, but here's what's actually happening. The people that we're reviewing, we're not able to process in an adequate way because X, Y, and Z, we don't have the tools, whatever the case might be. I think the more you're able to understand the context that a leader is in, present it in a compassionate way, while also contextualizing what's really happening on the ground, or what's happening for the people that we're supposed to be serving, that's where it all comes together, and where you really make a huge impact in the organization by speaking your truth.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, leaders, no matter what level or role or title, that they are just people the same way everyone else is. And we were talking about this a little bit before the session today, but like, the truth is that most people just don't know anything, right? We're all kind of like doing our very best with the knowledge and experience we have. But like, we can oftentimes look at leaders and think, oh, well, they have this title and this experience, so they know and they're confident. And we build this story up for ourselves that already stops us from leaning in to be that partner. But ultimately, like, people want to be seen and heard and understood. And for the scariest leader you can think of, even to go to them to say, hey, this is what I really know is happening in your org, what I see going on. I understand that. Here's why I think this is an important conversation for us to have. The worst they're going to say to you is no, or no thanks. But I think that coming in with that kind of lens of being willing to meet people halfway creates the space for dialogue to happen. And that's where we really become that future readiness that you're talking about, right? And like, don't future proof yourself already as an HR leader by just stopping yourself from even going in and engaging when you know you've got the skills and the data to start some good dialogue.
Yeah. And so to me, it's so important, because so much of what we need for the present and future of technology is a human-centric lens, a really rich human lens. And who has it better than the folks who are in this discussion right now? No one in the organization has a better perspective on that. So one of the things I think is really important, that I think you'll add a lot of value in your organizations by remembering and carrying with you, is that we need to really understand and identify what cultural elements truly matter for our long-term organizational resilience, and bring those alive, bring those to life. Really make sure that you're the advocate for what that truly looks like and what that represents, and what the human factors are that are going to lead to the real innovation decisions. And I think HR should absolutely be in the room when the question is like, what should we build, and not just, how do we roll this thing out, right? So these are ways to insert yourself in a very natural way for what HR's competencies are. Like, be sure that you are the owner of that human story of the organization. And the human story involves meaning, it involves culture, it involves context, it involves that synthesis of all the different points of view and diversity and so on. And I think if we have that going into our increasingly AI-centric future, then we'll bring that more human-centric lens to it. And it'll make a really nice counterpart that hopefully builds the best futures that we possibly can.
Yes, 100%, Kate. As we wrap up our session, our conversation today, if you're thinking about kind of your role in leading a human-centric organization, you want to chat with 15Five about how we can support you, please connect with us. We'd love to chat with you. And Kate, I'm not even going to try to summarize better than what you just did this conversation, because that was such a beautiful pin on everything we talked about. But there are so many incredible takeaways, really practical things from today I think our whole audience can lean into around what it means for HR to be a strategic influencer, a partner, and to find your power within the organization, whatever that is, and really being able to bring this unique lens to how we think about transformation, the difference between that and innovation, and really making our organizations really future ready. So if y'all want to hear more from Kate, we're going to share some links about where you can follow her on LinkedIn, where you can get her book. Kate, give us another little peek of your book so that folks know and they can go out and get it. What Matters Next? Go check it out, gang. And if you want to keep connecting with 15.5, we've got an incredible event coming up on February 11th, our HR Superstars event. Come and join us for this virtual gathering. We're going to chat with industry experts, hear directly from 15.5 leaders. I'll be there as well. You'll get to connect with more of your incredible community to really help just shaping who you are as a modern HR leader and what are the tools and practices that can keep evolving you. So thank you so much again, Kate, for being here and sharing your experience and wisdom with us. Bye.
Thank you so much.
The performance review is dead. We're sure you've heard that one before. But is it true? Not necessarily. There's a good chance that your performance review could just use a little makeover. Luckily, 15.5 has crafted a playbook to help. In it, you'll find a thorough review of academic and industry research from a survey of over 1,000 strategic HR leaders, distilled into 5 principles to keep in mind as you design or improve your review process. Every organization has different goals and context to consider when it's designing reviews. This playbook walks through decisions, options, and trade-offs you'll encounter as you design your review process and share best practices. We'll drop a link in the show notes for you to check out.